guys, and welcome back to another video. So apologies for the excess hand movements in the beginning. I'll kind of explain that in a little bit, but let's get started with just explaining what I'm going to be doing today for today's drawing. So I am working in Procreate, and here you can see I have a sketch, or I guess like an inked drawing of Freminet from Genshin Impact, and I kind of want to do an illustration based on this drawing just because technically when I did do the sketch and the inking for this one, I already had some kind of inkling on what kind of digital illustration I wanted to make for Freminet. So I also have some ballpoint pen sketches just to plan out poses, a little bit of the composition so that we can get a better idea of how I want to plan out for the illustration. So I usually like doing this traditionally before I work digitally. So that's what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be working on a similar canvas size that I did for Neuvillette, but for Neuvillette, I haven't finished him yet, so I'm going to render him at some later date, and I didn't record the process, so I do apologize in advance about that. I'm just going to slowly chip away at that one eventually. So for Freminet, I decided to work on a 8.5 by 11 sized canvas, which is about A4, and I found these references on Twitter. If I remember, I'll leave the link to the reference if you wish to use the same reference as me down below, and I'll see if I can insert some other ones because I did take some screenshots and just other images to help supplement any references that I need for today's drawing. So for the sketching portion, I am following the similar steps that I've been doing for quite a while, which is I'm using my painting brush to kind of flesh in the body and the pose and or the composition before I actually work on my actual sketch, and this gives me a better idea for me to plan the composition. I don't focus on a lot of details, and it kind of helps a little bit more with proportioning things. You can see that I'm trying to make sure that Freminet's helmet's gonna be somewhat correctly sized for him, and I wanted to make sure that I could use this as a very rough way for me to plan out the composition. So I did draw it very small and then size it up to where I think I would want the body to be cut off, or just how I want to position everything, because sometimes I feel like when I draw a pose on a canvas and I want to include more of the body, sometimes it feels like I'm playing with the borders of the canvas as like a restriction. So for me, it's probably easier for me to just focus on the pose, and then if I can, I will resize the pose and kind of position it where I want it to be so that I don't feel too pressured to stay within the confines of my canvas entirely. So now that I've kind of set up the pose, I've done all the kind of like rough lines and stuff for potentially the background, foreground elements, and anything for Freminet. I have lowered the opacity, and I'm moving in with the kind of sketch round brush so that we can actually do the actual sketch for Freminet. So as I'm doing the sketch, and because I think most people are familiar with my process for this, I'm going to talk about kind of the hand movement things in the beginning and kind of just why that was there. So basically, I did get requested for me to go back to doing a few draw with me videos, or just videos in general where I've talked and drawn at the same time as like I'm recording. So usually for draw with me's, as of more like the last year or so, I've done draw with me's with a voiceover afterwards, and people preferred that only because it gives me the opportunity to talk about the piece with hindsight, so that I can talk about things I preferred or like things I wanted to change during the process now that I've finished the drawing after the fact. But some people wanted me to do some kind of like real-time video where I'm kind of talking alongside with drawing like I used to before, just because you like to hear my thought process during the drawing stages and kind of doing explanations like that rather than doing the voiceover. So during the first portion and up to a good portion of the sketching, I was actually doing it in that format where I was actually doing real-time talking and all that, and I felt a little wary. I think after I did the sketch, I kind of knew that this illustration was going to take me a lot longer than I thought it was going to. So back then when I used to do, I guess like in the earlier stages of when my videos were mostly like draw with me's and ASMR videos, it was very much me having to do the drawing, and it took probably around anywhere between 2 to 3 hours. So it's a much shorter amount of time for me to do a finished illustration. And a lot of the times, and I still enjoy doing this, I usually focused on doing like headshots and stuff. But now that I've kind of like wanted to do something a little bit more ambitious for Freminet, and I did that for I think Kafka as well, and even some other ones that I'm trying to plan to do a little bit more full bodies or including more of the body into the composition or the illustration. I am realizing it's going to take me a lot longer for me to either render or color or even plan out. So this illustration is going to take me about 8.5 hours, which is, you know, a lot longer. It's more than double than the amount that I used to take for illustrations. So me doing talking for, even if it's like on and off for 8 hours, it's gonna do a lot of damage to my throat because I'm not used to it. Even when I stream for like 3 hours, I can feel the difference, but because I feel like as a person, I don't talk a lot, I feel like it does do, or like it makes my throat feel very hoarse afterwards, because I feel like I'm not giving myself like proper rest, or I'm not giving myself the opportunity to take a break while I talk. So it just feels very uncomfortable. But the second portion was actually because I don't know. I don't know if it's like the headspace or mind that kind of, what am I trying to say? The space that my head's in right now, I like listening to people talk while I work, which is not very good for me to be able to speak my own thoughts while I'm listening to other people. It just makes it very hard for me to articulate what I'm thinking or what I'm trying to say, because it's just much harder for me to talk while someone else is talking. So I tried listening to music, and it worked for the first like maybe hour that I was sketching Freminet. And if you guys want song recommendations as of recently, highly recommend probably I think it's 3 songs. So it's 17 Sara Sara, and the other one's, I think it's Ima. I'm gonna look it up super quick as I'm sketching Freminet. I know I'm going like super off track. I'll get back on track once we actually do the coloring, just because I feel like the sketching has nothing too notable at the moment. I did try my best to split certain parts into 2 different layers and then slowly merge them together if I needed to, just because I don't want to have too many pieces that were overlapping to be erased or kind of run the risk of being erased when I was sketching. So let me quickly look it up. 17, so I can find their other music video. Yeah, it's called Ima, Even If the World Ends Tomorrow? Yeah, Even If the World Ends Tomorrow. So Ima, Even If the World Ends Tomorrow by 17, or Sara Sara by 17, highly recommend those 2 songs, especially if you like kind of more like J-pop or just like listening to Japanese songs. Highly recommend their Japanese originals. They're super great. The other one is by Plave. So Plave is a virtual idol group, and I really like their songs a whole lot. Their characters are very cute too, so I've been always a fan of them. But their recent mini album really caught my eye, because I don't know, the song that they had for their most recent track is one of my favorites at the moment. So I highly recommend, if you haven't, check out Plave. So that's Plave, and they have a song called I forget what it's called in English, but I'll leave the links in the description if you're interested in any of those songs, and I'll try my best to link them if they have music videos. But yeah, I did end up listening to those songs like on repeat the entire time, but I feel like for me it gets a little bit harder wanting to talk about my process in real time, because I have so many gaps or spaces, or I ramble for way too long, that it's either hard for me to edit important parts while keeping parts that I'm kind of explaining certain things in, or trying to cut out too many parts where I'm rambling but I'm drawing something important. So I feel like there should be a balance, but maybe it's because it's been a long time since I've edited a video like that maybe I'm struggling to grasp how I can separate them a little bit better. Oh, another thing. So usually how I break up when I cut these kind of videos and stuff, I try my best to get rid of a lot of the pauses in the video, because a lot of the time, especially for Freminet, I had a whole lot of different references for his kind of illustration, and I was taking screenshots of like underwater scenes so I could get a good color palette and a little bit of the vegetation, even though I ended up not really using that for the actual background. But for his outfit, I had to look up a lot of different photos. So luckily some people posted kind of like compilation photos onto Twitter, which I'll make sure to link in the description if I can find it again in my like tweets. And then the other one is that even just like using the official art, or like for me, I was taking screenshots of when Freminet puts his helmet on during one of the trailers, because that's like the only time I could find a good shot of what his helmet actually looks like. So yeah, I was kind of struggling trying to find references for his helmet, so I did have to go back and go to that video to take references of when he's just putting it on so I can get the proper shape and stuff. Luckily I've already drawn it once, so it's not too bad, and I wasn't too confused when drawing his helmet. So now that the sketch is done, I am going ahead and reorganizing my layers, and for this time, I don't know, in my brain I'm also thinking potentially of making shorts, YouTube shorts, but I want to do it for like traditional videos. But I wanted to test it out by doing one for Freminet, but I'm doing a digital version, so I'm trying to keep a lot of my different layers intact, which is why I probably look like I have more layers than usual. Also, I skipped the first portion of the background, which is this one, because I end up scrapping it. So you can see that I'm merging all my layers together, and I'm not really feeling this background, so I'm just gonna go ahead, pick a new color, and just slap that color on top so we can restart. So for the sketch itself, I have already changed it to the multiply layer. I've already duplicated it so I can have a spare, but for me, I like to change my sketch to multiply so that the sketch color can change with whatever color is placed underneath, so that I can get a little bit of a softer look, and I don't really have to do a lot of adjusting of my sketch layers later, because I usually use my sketch as, I guess, like what you could consider line work or line art. But for me, I don't really do a second pass of lines, so I'm just gonna kind of hope for the best when I have my sketch finished at this point, and hopefully it will have enough detail for me to color and render at a later point. So for the background, I didn't really like the first one, and probably it was because I forgot how I wanted to approach doing the background. So I've done a few drawings of 17's Wonu in a chibi form, and I've always drawn him like underwater and associated with like either underwater or plants or something like that. And I've done a few versions of like a pink underwater scene, a green underwater scene, and a blue underwater scene, and there was like a particular way of how I like to render the background so that it appears a little bit more atmospheric in the back, and then we can have a little bit more details and darker objects closer to the front. So I kind of wanted to sandwich Freminet and his penguin pair, I think it's pair, in between these layers. So went ahead, redid the background. I think it fits a little bit better, and the colors just are a little bit more cohesive compared to the first version. I've also done a little bit of the detailing for the foreground, but I'm going ahead and kind of putting that opacity on that to 0 so that we can work on Freminet and pair without having the foreground impeding with the rest of the I guess like the character. So instead of painting things one by one, I decided that I would just take the kind of base color of what I would have Freminet's skin tone first, and I put it everywhere on the entire body, his legs, the helmet, and pair himself, so that I could just alpha lock and just slowly paint things all in one go and make everything kind of just condensed and a little bit cleaner, a little bit quicker. So I did alpha lock the layer so that I could do that. It just so while I'm working, I don't accidentally paint outside of certain areas, and because I usually work in a particular order, it's just easier for me to work like this instead of working on the skin, alpha locking it, unlocking it, working on the hair, locking it, unlocking it, and then working on the clothes. It's just a lot of back and forth. Also, apologies for the color change. So I noticed that while I was coloring in Freminet's eyes, I do make them a lot more blue rather than that kind of periwinkle, almost softer purple color that his eyes are actually colored. I noticed that my camera wasn't picking it up correctly either, even though I did draw his eyes very blue which is incorrect, but my camera was having a hard time picking up the colors, so I did try to fiddle with the colors so that it could match a little bit closer to the actual colors on my iPad rather than just how my camera just randomly picks up certain colors like blues and yellows just very incorrectly. So you can see that coloring for the, I guess, like base colors and shading and stuff, I'm kind of chunking it by doing it section by section, and I'm painting pretty much everything on one layer minus I think it's like kind of the teal area for the front of his helmet, and then the teal-ish kind of turquoise area for the side of his helmet as well, just because I wanted to give a softer kind of glow and gradient to them without having to erase and cover up certain areas. It's just much easier if I did that separately and then merge it after. Also, the little kind of like curved X little pattern thing on his helmet, like the front of his helmet, I did do on a separate layer just in general, so I could shade things and I can add glow a lot easier without being scared of needing to erase it if I needed to fix, let's say, the gradient or the color underneath. So I did keep that on a separate layer. I feel like sometimes people might get a little bit confused the fact with that I work on one layer for coloring usually, or I merge everything onto one layer afterwards to render. It's not really like a flex, if that makes sense. I know some people treat it as a flex, but I don't see it as a flex. It's literally just me trying to organize the layers in the most easiest way possible. But if there is a need for me to add extra layers or to keep extra layers that are not fully merged, I will do that. I don't feel like I want to restrict myself, because I know some people find it fascinating that I merge my layers, because I know some people just paint on top of their drawings rather than merging and having everything just on one layer. But I feel like some people also treat it as like if I do everything on one layer, I'm keeping everything on one layer. Like, I don't want to add extra layers or something like that, but it's definitely not the case. So I'll definitely add extra layers if I need them. Usually when I add effects or I'm adding like extra foregrounds and background, or if I have different elements to the illustration, I will keep them on separate layers. So for Freminet, I am pretty much finished with the colors, which I will still consider like the rough colors because we still have to go ahead and clean up and render. But before we do that, you can see that I went ahead and alpha locked my sketch. I've also changed my sketch color to match a little bit closer to certain areas before merging it down to my colored layer. So now that Freminet is kind of on one layer minus the background, I am going ahead and adding some effect layers so that I can adjust the colors. So I basically colored Freminet as normal without focusing on the background. So all I took in consideration is just very vaguely where the lighting is going to be coming from, which I want it to be coming from behind and kind of like in the middle between Pear and Freminet himself, so that we can have a little bit of a highlight and a little bit of backlighting between all three of like Pear, Freminet, and his helmet. But to kind of intensify and make sure that he appears a little bit more like underwater, I did want to make everything cool. So I did add a overlay layer, and I'm going to add a multiply layer to the entire figure so that we can kind of put it into that bluish hue over top of everything at once. I'm also adding a screen layer to the back of Freminet's leg just because I want to push it into the background. And I did do a mistake, is that I forgot that the background was not at full opacity, so Freminet's leg might appear a lot lighter, and I forget to adjust that before turning up the opacity again. So his leg is just gonna appear very pale until a little bit later, because I will adjust the color a little bit because I realized that during the kind of like cleaning and rendering phase that I didn't turn up the opacity of the background to max, because I don't remember why I turned down the opacity, but it wasn't at max, so it's not as pale. But once I'm done putting in all my adjustment layers, so I believe I added 3 adjustment layers. So I added a multiply layer to kind of add the overall shadow, so that Freminet is more or less like a little bit darker on the front, and then we can add our rim lighting with an addition layer. And then I added a overlay layer to kind of put a softer blue on top of everything. I guess I added 4 layers, and then I had a screen layer so I could knock back the leg of Freminet so that it appears a little bit more in the background and it becomes a little bit more atmospheric by pushing it to the back by making it lighter. After that, merged everything, and we are now on to rendering and cleanup. So this is literally me just doing a lot of back and forth of color picking. I'm making a lot of things either darker or sharper, cleaning a lot of things up so that things just become a little bit more clear. I think one of my favorite parts are the eyes for him, even though I didn't get the color correctly. So the eye, I feel like I'm about to sneeze. Okay, so for the eyes, like I said, I didn't get his eye color correct. I did definitely made it more blue, but once I put over that blue layer over top of everything, it definitely made it a lot more blue rather than purple, like even more so than before. So I do apologize that once you guys see the full illustration at the very end, it's not going to be very purple at all. Just think of it maybe because I submerged him under a very cool lighting of water and stuff, so maybe that's why, maybe not. I already told you that it was already my mistake from the beginning, so yeah. So even though this took me 8 hours, I had a blast drawing him. I feel like it's also just nice because for the last few weeks, I would say even 3 weeks at this point, I haven't been really feeling my drawings all that much. I haven't really been liking them, but after I've done, I think I did a Jonghan drawing and I did New Villette, his drawing as well. I've been kind of getting back into the groove of liking my drawings and figuring out why I don't like certain aspects, or if I feel like I was just doing more of a cop out for the most part. And I don't know if it's during when I drew Welt and Kafka, there was another one in there too where I felt like I'm just doing a routine or a cycle for the drawing and not really enjoying the concept of it, or I wasn't doing my usual doing research on different themes or color palettes or different things I wanted to do for the illustration. It became a little bit more mundane and very at least for me, even step by step, it felt very cookie cutter. And because it felt very cookie cutter, it felt very not, I guess boring and a little bit tedious to draw. So I'm kind of glad I did the Freminet one. I also liked the one that I did of Jonghan and Toram, and then my new Villette that I'm still currently working on. I just want to make sure that I'm in a good headspace while I'm working on them so that I don't get too bogged down and being I'm gonna abandon this piece, because I have a few that I've already abandoned because I'm in this weird state of low-key hating my art at the moment. But right now I feel like I'm liking it, so hopefully I can just ride this wave of just enjoying art again so that I can continue to draw, because there's a lot of characters I still wish to draw. I would love to draw Linny and Lynette and do more of a kind of theatrical movie poster-ish kind of thing. I'm gonna do a lot of planning for it so that it can come to fruition a little bit more easier than me just winging it and then recording it, because I feel like that's part of it also, is just when I record videos for drawings, I want to condense it so much so that the recording is not as long, if that makes sense, so that I would have an easier time editing and the video won't be 40 minutes or to an hour long. I feel like even 30 minutes is too long, but I feel like maybe condensing 8 hours into 30 minutes isn't too bad. Even though yeah, I personally really enjoyed doing this piece. I think also I really love drawing Freminet's helmet a lot, even though I hate drawing usually anything that's slightly more mechanical or a little bit more actual structure, because I feel like you can see a lot of the errors in it. But even though I can see the errors in the helmet, I had a whole lot of fun just rendering the little metal parts and adding the screws and highlights, and I don't know, it was just very fun to do. And I feel like that was another reason why I wanted to do an inked drawing of him in my sketchbook, is mostly because his design is very for me, it's like one of the cutest designs. I really love his outfit. It's very cute. His demeanor is very cute. I love the idea that he loves to do diving and being underwater. I love the helmet design. I love his little penguin. He's like one of those characters where I feel like I want to, I guess, like protect, similar to like Kale in a sense, because as much as I wanted to draw more of Kale, I think I got too swept up in like drawing other people, or just like I didn't find the right time to draw her. But she gives me Freminet gives me a similar feeling to Kale, where it's just like that character I want to protect, and I don't know, they're very adorable is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, I definitely want to draw him a lot more, but I would love to draw him with his siblings, or just like in general, because the concept of like diving and underwater is always like something fun to explore. And just because like visually underwater, kind of like the environment, or you could do lighting, or like foliage and plants, or like aquatic creatures, or just like the lighting and stuff, the atmosphere, it's just very fun to play around with. And it's been a while since I've done anything underwater related, so I would love to do one with Kokomi as well. And maybe one day I will revisit a Kokomi piece that I've always wanted to do, but I was too nervous to do it. So yeah, maybe I'll do a video on me revisiting old concepts, and we can see how I visualize them now versus before. Because the Kokomi one was definitely from I don't even know if it's 2 years at this point. But it's very close to when I released the ASMR video for Kokomi. I had like 2 different concepts that I wanted to do for her, because I wanted to do something very flowy and airy and underwater, but with that kind of lighting that you would get if you were closer to the surface of the water, and then you would have the sun blaring into the water and creating a very beautiful kind of scattered light look. So I'd love to tackle and do something like that in the future. But for the one of Freminet and Pear, I think this one just became a little bit more serene and pretty, which I do not mind. This is kind of like the drawing that I feel like I needed to kind of push me to have a little bit more confidence again, drawing a lot more. And I'm glad I took my time is kind of like the biggest thing. Because like I mentioned, sometimes when I do recordings for videos, I feel like I'm skimping out a little bit because I'm trying to condense it to, at this point, like even 5 hours or less is like good for me for recording. So 8 hours is a little bit on like the longer side of recording, but I feel like this one definitely needed it, especially with the background. I drew more Freminet rather than just like the headshot. I included Pear as well. I apologize. I should have said this in the beginning. I have no idea how to pronounce anybody's name in Fontaine, so I do apologize if anyone who speaks French is like, yuck to me how I'm pronouncing anything here. And yeah, I forgot to add in a little bit of like aquatic creatures or fish, so I decided to add a little bit via the little fishies that you get to restore any health during the underwater portion of Fontaine. And I added a little bit into the background because I didn't want the orange to be too pungent in the whole piece. Now, right here, I'm merging my layers because with the size of my canvas and the resolution, I can only have a maximum of 19 layers. And apparently me duplicating my layers exceeded that amount. So I went ahead and just merged a few more layers, duplicated it so that we could actually go ahead and blur and then erase, so we can keep Freminet in focus, but then keeping everything else a little bit softer and a little bit out of focus. I also missed this pattern, so I forgot to throw that in, so I did delete the adjustment layer and then the blurred layer to redo this, and then I'll do it all over again. There's another place I missed a little part, so if you happen to see where I missed it before I hit to the end part, like comment and let me know if you know where I missed a specific detail, or at least a color that I kind of missed. But yeah, here is Freminet finished, and he's holding his helmet underwater. I know, like, concept-wise, it probably doesn't make sense because I feel like the helmet would only function like that if it's actually on his head, and I feel like he would only be really underwater like this peacefully, maybe if he has his helmet on, especially like this deep into the water. But you know, it's okay, it's pretty, so I'm leaving it in. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!